The meeting is now open to the public and we have started recording.
All right, thanks, Brandon. The time is now 8:30, so we'll begin our meeting. Hello and welcome to the proposed rulemaking stakeholder meeting for the Producer Responsibility Program for statewide recycling. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Darla Ahrens and I'm the Producer Responsibility Program lead for the Materials Management Unit in the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or at the department as you'll hear me refer to it today. I will facilitate this meeting along with the help of my colleague, Brandon Ingersoll. And today's meeting is focused on the third draft of the proposed rules in Section 18. The primary purpose of this meeting is to explain the updates that have been made to these proposed rules based on stakeholder input and to gather feedback on those changes. Our agenda for today includes first covering some Zoom logistics, followed by introductions to the rulemaking team, a summary of House Bill 22-1355, known as the Producer Responsibility Program for Statewide Recycling, or the ACT, an overview of our rulemaking process and timeline, reviewing the third draft of proposed rules, and then receiving your input. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Brandon, our communications all-star, to go over some meeting logistics.
Thank you, Darla. So I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping items for today. Please make sure that you've joined the meeting with either your phone or computer audio. To provide comments during today's meeting, you can use the chat function. Or if you would like to provide verbal comments at the end of the presentation, use the raise hand function. If you join by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute when the time comes. Please be aware that we are recording this meeting and rulemaking materials are available on the Solid Waste Rulemaking's webpage, which I will link to the chat right now. Thank you again for joining us. I'll turn it over to Darla here to do some introductions as soon as I link that.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. My screen is glitching. There we go. Okay. Staff we have joining us today includes Brandon Ingersoll, who you just virtually met, and Brandon will keep us all organized today in our virtual environment and will co-facilitate our public comment and feedback time. We also have with us Wolf Cray, the Materials Management Unit Leader, who is seasoned in rulemaking and here to help answer questions. Good morning, Wolf.
Morning, Darla. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
We have Rebecca Fisher from the Attorney General's office here to help us today and answer any legal questions you might have. Good morning, Becca.
Morning, Darla.
And we also have David Snap, our Solid Waste Program Manager. Thanks for being here, David. All right, moving into the summary. On June 3rd, 2022, the Producer Responsibility Program for Statewide Recycling Act, or House Bill 22-1355, was signed into law. This act sets up a producer responsibility program that requires producers of packaging and paper products to fund a statewide recycling system and recycle those materials. These companies formed an independent nonprofit organization called a Producer Responsibility Organization, which you will hear us refer to as the organization or as the PRO. The department appointed Circular Action Alliance, or CAA, as the PRO to coordinate, fund, and manage the statewide recycling system with department oversight. Under this act, producers will pay membership dues to the program based on the amount and the type of packaging they sell in Colorado. The program will create one consistent statewide list of what can be recycled, and then the program will reimburse private companies and local governments to operate recycling, collection, and processing programs. The program will cover the costs of recycling, including consumer education and government oversight of the program. The department will oversee the program, and an advisory board composed of local governments, recycling and composting operators, nonprofits, and other key stakeholders has been established to help the state implement the program and to ensure the program meets the needs of local Colorado communities and businesses. This program will also provide a funding mechanism for recycling services and infrastructure across the state, increase recycling access in Colorado, including at apartments and in rural areas, save local governments money by reimbursing their costs to run their recycling programs, support Colorado businesses by creating a more resilient domestic supply of raw materials to make new products, and it will encourage producers to design and manage covered materials to prevent and minimize their negative environmental, social, economic, and health impacts. Our next slide further describes the rulemaking process, which says that the legislature has authorized the department to develop proposed regulations or rules for the producer responsibility program. The Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission, or the Commission, is the rulemaking board authorized to promulgate regulations pertaining to solid waste and hazardous waste under the Colorado Revised Statute. The Commission is authorized to promulgate regulatory requirements under the Act within Section 701. And this slide cites the statutes that give the Commission the authorization to establish these proposed rules under Sections 703, 705, 710, and 713. This slide cites the section of the Act under 705 that gives the department the authorization to develop regulatory requirements for the pro and producers to enforce requirements of the Act. We published the Statement of Basis and Purpose, or the SBP, on March 26th. The SBP describes who the requirements apply to, what they are required to do under the proposed regulations, and explains the purpose of the proposed regulations. The publishing of the SBP then kicks off the formal rulemaking process. And prior to today's meeting, we've had 5 stakeholder meetings from December through February. Today, we will review the 3rd draft of proposed regulations. Revisions to the current draft are based on stakeholder feedback we received from the prior draft. The deadline to comment on today's 3rd draft is April 8th, which is posted on our website that Brandon is just posting into the chat now. We really value all of your feedback, and we are documenting and reviewing all of the comments received. Please be sure to reference that you're commenting on the 3rd draft if you send in written comments, and indicate the specific section that you're commenting on when you submit your feedback. It really helps us keep everything organized. Thank you. All comments received, whether verbally or written, are entered into our administrative record, which becomes public record. And lastly, the changes for this proposed rule would be in effect on July 1st, 2024, if promulgated by the Commission. Focusing on the specific timeline just for the primary regs rulemaking process, we held 5 stakeholder meetings, 1 on each of the proposed rule concepts in December and January. And then the 5th stakeholder meeting on the 2nd draft of all 4 concepts was held in February. We also presented an information briefing to the Commission in February 2024. And today is our 6th stakeholder meeting to go over the 3rd draft of the proposed rules. Then on May 21st, the Commission rulemaking hearing will take place. And please note that what we're presenting today are rule concepts. And so we do welcome and encourage your feedback during this time. We really rely on your expertise as we draft these rules. So thank you for participating and being a part of this process. That said, current regulations for Section 1.8 will remain in effect until rules are promulgated by the Commission. And if promulgated again, these rules will take effect on July 1st. All right, let's jump into the updates to the 3rd draft of proposed rules for the primary regs. Today, I will walk you through all the updates that were made to our 2nd draft of proposed rules. These changes were made based on extensive feedback received from stakeholders. So we want to take a moment to thank you for providing your input and lending your expertise. It has been exceptionally helpful for us in refining the draft regs. All of those changes we made are indicated in light blue highlighted text in the 3rd draft PDF online, as well as in our presentation today. Any red font you see has carried over from the 1st draft. And as a reminder, the red font represents new definitions being added for terms that were referenced in statute but not defined. And red font in some cases indicates clarifying language being added to statutory definitions. Also, any yellow highlights you see has carried over from edits that were made on the 2nd draft. The first set of updates pertain to section 1.8 regarding the producer responsibility authorization and dollar limit exemption for small producers. Here in section 182, we calculated the 3.5% consumer price index adjustment for 2024, which raises the dollar limit exemption for producers with less than $5,506,200 in realized gross total revenue, not including on-premises alcohol sales during the prior calendar year. Next, I will talk you through updates to section 18.1, which pertains to the general provisions. The first update is in 18.15b regarding the duty to produce records. So in our second draft, we had specified a period of 10 business days for producers or the pro to produce records requested by the department. And after receiving additional stakeholder feedback, we have amended that to say 10 business days or the timeline specified by the department, whichever is later. And the purpose of that amendment was to allow for additional flexibility if the complexity of the records request will require more than 10 business days to produce. Next, in section 18.15c, we included statutory language that was erroneously omitted from the initial draft rules, which specifies that if the pro ceases to exist or administer the program, they must transfer all producer data to another pro designated by the department or to the department if no other pro exists. And by adding paragraph C, we then adjusted the subsequent numbering of paragraphs D and E accordingly. Section 18.16 includes all of the definitions, and we made a few changes here, starting with the term durable product, where we struck the words, quote, and multiple uses, end quote. So the term now reads, durable product means a product that will remain usable for its original intended purpose for at least 5 years. The statute did not include multiple uses language, but it does specify 5 years. So we made this change to be more in alignment with the statute. For the term materials recovery facility, we added a new sentence that reads, for the purposes of this definition, end market business means a business or a portion of a business that processes recyclable materials or reuses recyclable materials in new products sold or otherwise furnished to end users. And this change was made based on stakeholder feedback received to provide additional clarity on who the end market businesses are. The next definition we modified was a minor administrative amendment to the term non-residential location, where we inserted the statutory language that specifies these are locations identified in the final plan. Then we made a couple of amendments to the term plastic. First, we struck the words, quote, and includes coatings and adhesives, end quote. Then we added a sentence that reads, packaging that is primarily made from another material other than plastic shall not be considered plastic packaging. And these changes were made based on stakeholder feedback to ensure that a paper product lined with a plastic coating or adhesive, or that was not predominantly made of paper, wouldn't be categorized as paper instead of plastic. Next, we have the term product, where we simply added the words, quote, sold to a consumer, end quote. And this edit was made based on feedback received to align with the intent of the act, which is for consumer-facing products. Next, we have a newly proposed term for service packaging, which is being added in section 18.2 based on stakeholder input to include producers of service packaging in the order of obligation, which I'll present in a few minutes. So since we added this level of detail to help in determining who the obligated producer is, we thereby added the definition here to describe what service packaging means, which is packaging that includes, but is not limited to, A, single-use shopping bags, including checkout, produce, and bulk food bags, B, bags, wraps, single-use trays, and associated items such as paper used to separate slices of cheese and used by a retailer for packaging cheese, tofu, produce, meat, and fish, And C, trays provided to a consumer for containing multiple plants purchased at a nursery. And D, bags or envelopes used to contain screws, nails, and other bulk fasteners at a hardware store. The last amendment in 1816 we are proposing to add is the term, quote, unfilled packaging material, end quote, which means packaging materials that are not used as packaging when supplied to or purchased by consumers individually or in bulk, but are used for the express purpose of facilitating food or beverage consumption. The reason for this inclusion is again due to new language in section 18.2 in the order of obligation that describes the producers of unfilled packaging materials as being obligated. Next, I'll walk you through the proposed edits to section 18.2 regarding producers. The first edit we made based on comments received was to strike 18.2.2, which was for producer categories. And categories were initially added to support the order of obligation, but upon review, they ended up being duplicative of the order of obligation language, and they were therefore stricken. That said, with the striking of the producer categories, we did some fine tuning to the order of obligation to ensure all of the aforementioned producer categories were included and to include additional feedback we received from stakeholders. So first, in the introductory paragraph, we included an exception for producers of any other covered materials whose obligations are determined independently. In paragraph A, for producers of products using packaging materials, we added additional clarifying language to include producers of unfilled packaging material, and this was based on stakeholder input. In A1, we changed the language to read, quote, the brand owner of the product contracting the manufacturing of the packaging material used for the product, end quote. This was based on stakeholder feedback and was added for clarity. We added similar language to paragraph A2 for the brand or trademark licensee of the product who is contracting the manufacturing of the packaging material used for the product. We struck paragraph 3 as it became duplicative and made a subsequent administrative edit to the numbering of subparagraphs 3 and 4. Lastly, we added a new paragraph 4, which describes that if the newly numbered subparagraph 3 does not apply, then the distributor who first distributes the packaging material within or into the state, and this was added to align with the statutory requirements. Further in the order of obligation in paragraph B regarding internet transactions, we added clarifying language in subparagraph 2, which indicates to follow the determination in paragraph A for the producers of packaging material used to ship the product to consumer. So nothing substantive was changed here, but rather it was amended for consistency. Also in 18.2.3 in paragraph C, first, in subparagraph 1 regarding publications, we removed the word first, so it now reads the obligated producer for paper products rather than the first obligated producer. And we had originally added the word first based on stakeholder input to clarify that there should only be one obligated producer here. But after receiving additional input, we opted to strike this word and instead add a new subparagraph 3, which more clearly states there shall only be one obligated producer for a particular paper product. Also, in alignment with that edit, in subparagraph 2, we struck the language, quote, and where no other person is obligated, for the same reason as the new language in subparagraph 3 more clearly describes the intention of the statute to not double charge a single product. Also, there are a couple of minor changes in subparagraphs 2A and B. We changed the directing language to contracting for consistency. Next, in 18.2.3 for the order of obligation, we added a new tier for producers of service packaging that I mentioned earlier, which follows the same order of obligation as A, but adds subparagraph 3, which states, quote, where the producer in 1 or 2 is a business operated wholly or in part as a franchise, The producer is the franchisor, if that franchisor has franchisees that operate in Colorado, end quote. As previously mentioned, service packaging includes, but is not limited to, single-use shopping bags, including checkout produce and bulk food bags, wraps, single-use trays, and associated items such as paper used to separate slices of cheese and used by a retailer for packaging cheese, tofu, produce, meat, and fish, and trays provided to consumer for containing multiple plants purchased at a nursery, or bags or envelopes used to contain screws, nails, and other bulk fasteners at a hardware store. Lastly, in the order of obligation in paragraph E, we added the same language regarding the brand who is contracting the manufacturing of the product, again, for consistency. We also added the franchisor, franchisee language here as well for consistency. And next we will move into 18.2.5 regarding the producer requirements. And there are just a couple of small administrative fixes here with the striking of the word initial in paragraph 1, as it was deemed unnecessary based on stakeholder input. And then in subparagraph 2, we added an and or to clarify that producers do not need to register with both the pro and the additional pro, but rather producers just need to register with one pro. Moving right along into section 18.3, which includes covered materials and the minimum recyclable list, or the MRL. The first amendment was in 18.3.1 regarding covered materials, and this was a simple administrative fix that strikes the word, quote, except both of the following, end quote, in subparagraph 3C, as that language should have been stricken in our second draft when the yellow highlighted text was removed. Then in 18.3.2 regarding exempt materials, based on input received, we struck the Federal Drug Administration food code requirements, as these are already covered elsewhere in another statute. Moving on to section 18.5 concerning the producer responsibility organization, we just have one minor proposed change here, and that's to add language for consistency to the end of subparagraph D1 that references the plan proposal submittal requirements in 18.5.2A5. Lastly, I will present section 18.11 regarding inspection, enforcement, and penalties. In paragraph A, concerning the department's right to inspection and request records, we added a clarifying statement which reads, notice is not required before such inspections except for in circumstances that require immediate inspection, and inspections will take place during normal business hours. And these proposed changes were included based on stakeholder suggestions. Lastly, in paragraph B regarding inspections, we added the same new language from section 18.1 that allows for 10 business days or by the timeline specified by the department, whichever is later, to allow inspection or provide records before enforcement begins. And we made it, so thanks for hanging in there with me. I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully you have a more clear understanding of the proposed changes in this third draft that we're making based on the feedback we received from all of you. We'd like to open the floor now to receive any additional feedback you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Brandon to help facilitate this portion of the meeting. Take it from here, Brandon.
Thanks, Darla. So we're now at the stakeholder input period of the meeting. We'll start by calling on attendees in the order that they've raised their hands. So when I call your name, please unmute yourself before speaking and then state your full name and affiliation. We'll then follow up from verbal comments with any questions that were asked in the chat. I'd like to note before we start, though, that we will respond to as many questions as we can today, but if we need to follow up on a question, we will do so promptly. If we run out of time or if you're not comfortable speaking during today's meeting, please email eprcomments@state.co.us with the word rulemaking in the subject line, and we'll be happy to answer your questions or receive your feedback in that way. I'm now going to post that email address in the chat box, and then I'm going to start calling on folks. Okay, so I see Coriana has a question. Go ahead and please unmute yourself, Coriana. Coriana? If you're trying to speak, you're still muted. But we'll give you a moment here. Oh, okay, perfect. So Coriana said for folks that can't see the chat that everything's been covered. So we'll give it another moment here. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand or throw them into the chat and we'll address them. Okay, well, if there's no other comments or feedback, again, please make sure to reference that EPR comments at state.co.us email with rulemaking comments in the subject line. If anything comes up, we always appreciate your feedback. So please don't hesitate to send those. Oh, Megan has a question here. So do all reusable items need to last 5 years?
Thank you for your question, Megan. I'm just going to take a moment to reference the statute because I want to make sure I accurately answer your question. So in the statutory definition, for reuse or refill, it means the return into the marketplace of a covered material that has already been used in the same manner as originally intended without a change in the covered material's purpose and was intended to be used for its original purpose for at least 5 times. So yes.
And Megan, please let us know if that adequately covered your question, or if you had any follow-ups, you can post them in the chat as well, and we can make sure to answer that.
Yeah, and I could
Okay.
just pop in real quick. This is Becca. I just want to clarify. The 5 times is in the reuse refill definition, but the 5 years is in the durable products piece. So you might be conflating both of those because the durable products definition is about products that are exempt from packaging materials, if that helps.
And Liz, did that also address your question? Okay, perfect. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to post them. I'll wait a moment here if you need to type anything up. Or obviously feel free to raise your hand and we can do that in that way as well. Okay, well, if that's all the feedback that we have today, we're going to go ahead and move along. Again, make sure to reference that email address that I posted in the chat and feel free if anything comes up to send it over to us. So thank you all so much for your feedback. We're going to compile all the comments that we received for consideration on future proposed rules. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Darla to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. And thank you all for your time and participation today. You can visit the rulemaking website shown on the screen and in the chat to view today's meeting materials. As a reminder, we will keep the public comment period open for this 3rd draft of proposed rules through April 8th. So just for 1 week on this round. So feel free to email eprcomments@state.co.us up until that time. For more information about the Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission, you can visit the website shown here, which is also included in the chat box. And I'm available as always if you'd like to set up a meeting to talk about any of these proposed rules or to chat about Colorado's EPR program. My contact information is at the bottom of the screen here. Thank you again. We appreciate you taking the time to provide input on the Producer Responsibility Program rulemaking. We are ending this meeting for now. Bye.